The first time I saw an Imperial shuttle break through the clouds above our farm, I knew the water season was lost. Imperial craft burn moisture from the air. The old-timers on Kinyara claim they can taste metal for days after a Star Destroyer passes through the atmosphere. That day, I tasted nothing but fear. I remember watching the shuttle descend, its wings folding upward like some predatory bird. White armor gleamed against the shuttle's grey hull as the boarding ramp descended. Stormtroopers, not the garrison troops from the settlement who sometimes patrolled for spice runners. These were proper Imperial soldiers with polished armor that reflected the harsh sunlight of our dying world. My father stood beside me as the soldiers approached across our barren field. His hand gripped my shoulder, fingers digging into muscle as if trying to anchor me to the farm. The squad leader carried a holopad that projected blue light across his white chest plate. Names and numbers, quotas, resources to be collected. The Empire had never cared about Kinyara before. Our world had nothing valuable except the water we coaxed from the air, just enough to sustain our meager crops and ourselves. But the war had grown. The rebellion had spread. And now the Empire needed bodies. Citizens of the Outer Rim, the officer announced through his helmet speaker. The Emperor requires your service in this time of insurgency and terrorism. Your contribution to the Imperial war effort has been calculated based on population and resource metrics. My mother emerged from our home, wiping her hands on her apron, eyes wide with the fear we all felt, but could not speak aloud. The smallest child, my sister Jaina, clung to her leg, face pressed against the rough fabric of our mother's work clothes. Kinyara Settlement, Zone 17, will provide 8 able males between the ages of 16 and 30, the officer continued. Your names have been selected through Imperial lottery. Resistance will result in summary judgment. The stormtroopers spread out in a semicircle, blaster rifles held at the ready, not quite aimed at us but positioned to be raised in an instant. The meaning was clear. My father stepped forward. We cannot spare any hands from the harvest. Without our full workforce, we will not meet water quotas for the season. The officer did not look up from his holopad. Imperial conscription supersedes agricultural priorities. The following citizens will prepare for immediate departure. Ralvek. My name. The first name called. The blood drained from my face as my father's grip tightened on my shoulder, then fell away. I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. You have 1 hour to collect personal effects not exceeding 2 kilograms. Weapons of any kind are forbidden. Report to the landing zone for processing. 7 more names followed mine. Neighbors. Friends. The youngest son of the old woman who sold root vegetables in the village square, all plucked from our world by the sterile blue light of an Imperial database. My father turned to me, his weathered face a mask of helpless rage. Run, he whispered. I shook my head. I had seen what happened to families of deserters on the Holonet. The Empire would burn our farm. They would take my sister for the labor corps. My parents would disappear into detention centers where the only escape was death. 1 hour, I told him. Inside our home, my mother moved like a sleepwalker, gathering a spare set of clothes, my identification chip, the small carved stone my grandfather had given me before he died. Her hands trembled as she packed these meager possessions into a cloth bag. Take this, my father said, pressing something cold and heavy into my palm. I looked down to see his moisture collector regulator tool, not a weapon but valuable, something that could be traded if needed. I will come back, I promised, the words hollow even as I spoke them. My mother pressed her forehead against mine, her tears wetting my face. Remember who you are, she whispered. No matter what they do to you, remember Kinyara, remember us. I nodded, unable to speak. Then my sister wrapped her arms around my legs, too young to understand why I was packing, why our mother was crying. Bring me a star, she said, repeating our game where I promised to catch her the brightest star in the sky. I will, I lied, knowing that where I was going, I would see no stars at all. When the hour was up, I walked across our farm toward the Imperial shuttle, my small bag clutched in my hand. 7 others converged on the landing zone from different directions. Some had family walking beside them, others walked alone. None of us looked at each other, none of us wanted to acknowledge what was happening. The processing was quick and brutal. My bag was taken and searched. The regulator tool was confiscated as potential contraband. My clothes were deemed unnecessary. My grandfather's stone was tossed aside as worthless. I was left with nothing but my identification chip, which an officer scanned before directing me up the shuttle ramp. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of disinfectant. Metal benches lined the walls, and we were ordered to sit. Restraints automatically closed around our wrists when we sat down. No one protested. No one spoke. Through the narrowing gap of the closing ramp, I caught one last glimpse of Kinyara. My father stood watching, my mother's face buried in his chest, my sister staring with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Then the ramp sealed shut with a hiss of hydraulics, and my world disappeared. We did not go directly to a training facility. The shuttle made 3 more stops at settlements across Kinyara, collecting additional conscripts until we numbered nearly 40 men and women. Some wept silently, others stared with vacant expressions at the shuttle floor. I focused on memorizing faces, names whispered during brief moments when the stormtroopers moved to the cockpit. Remembering felt like an act of defiance. After the last stop, we ascended through the atmosphere, the shuttle shaking violently as it broke free of Kinyara's gravity. Through a small viewport, I watched my planet shrink to a dusty brown sphere, then to a dot, then to nothing as we made the jump to hyperspace. The next thing I saw was the Star Destroyer. I had seen them in Imperial propaganda broadcasts, of course. Every citizen of the Empire knew their distinctive wedge shape, but nothing prepared me for the reality of such a vessel. It filled the viewport, impossibly large, a city in space built for a single purpose: war. We docked in one of countless hangars, a cavernous space filled with shuttles, TIE fighters, and hundreds of personnel moving with practiced efficiency. When the ramp lowered, the sound hit me first. Mechanical noises echoing off metal walls, orders being shouted, the constant background hum of massive engines. "Disembark and form lines," a stormtrooper ordered. We stumbled down the ramp, legs weak from hours of confinement. The artificial gravity of the Star Destroyer felt slightly stronger than Kinyara's, pulling at my limbs, making each step an effort. We formed uneven lines as instructed, standing on deck markings we did not understand. A human officer in a grey uniform approached, his cap pulled low over cold eyes. He walked slowly down our lines, inspecting us like livestock. Occasionally he would make a notation on his datapad. Once, he stopped before a young woman and lifted her chin with his gloved hand, turning her face from side to side before moving on. "Conscript intake processing will now commence," he announced. "You will be divided by physical capability and aptitude. Resistance will result in immediate disciplinary measures." We were herded through a series of checkpoints. At the first, our identification chips were scanned again, and each of us was assigned a number. From that moment, we were no longer addressed by name. KR2187, a medical droid, designated me after scanning my chip. I repeated the number silently. KR for Kinyara, I assumed. 2187. Just digits now. At the next checkpoint, our clothes were taken. We stood naked under harsh lights as medical droids scanned our bodies for disease, weakness, or contraband. Age and physical condition were assessed and recorded. Several of the older conscripts were separated from our group, led away down a different corridor. I never saw them again. Finally, we were each given a grey jumpsuit with our number printed on the chest and directed to a holding area. The room was large and empty except for benches along the walls. No windows. No indication of where in the massive vessel we were located. The door locked behind us. "What happens now?" someone whispered. No one answered. No one knew. Hours passed. Some tried to sleep on the hard benches. Others paced nervously. I sat with my back against the cold metal wall, eyes closed, trying to fix the memory of my family in my mind. Already their faces seemed to be fading, replaced by the clinical efficiency of Imperial processing. The door slid open without warning. A stormtrooper entered, helmet turning to survey the room. "Meals," he announced, pushing a cart into the center of the room. On the cart were trays of a gray, gelatinous substance and containers of water. We approached cautiously, taking the offered food. The substance had no smell and barely any taste. Nutritional paste. I forced myself to eat, knowing I would need strength for whatever came next. As I ate, I studied the stormtrooper. The white armor revealed nothing of the person inside. Was this someone like me? A conscript from some distant world, transformed into an anonymous enforcer of Imperial will, or a volunteer, a true believer in the Empire's cause? "How long will we be here?" someone asked the trooper. The helmet turned toward the speaker. "You will be here until you are transferred to training." "Training for what?" The stormtrooper did not respond. After collecting the empty trays, he exited, the door sealing behind him. Sleep came fitfully that night, if it was night at all. Time lost meaning in the unchanging light of the holding room. I dreamed of water falling from the sky, a rare occurrence on Kinyara that farmers celebrated as a miracle. In my dream, the water turned to fire as it hit the ground, consuming our fields, our home, my family. I woke, gasping, drenched in sweat. The door opened again. A different stormtrooper, indistinguishable from the first. "Line up," he ordered. We formed a ragged line. Some still wore the hollow, shocked expressions from the day before. Others had begun to develop a hardened resignation. I wondered what my own face revealed. "You will proceed to transport, maintain order. Disruptions will not be tolerated." We shuffled out into a wide corridor, bright lights reflecting off white walls. Other groups joined us from adjoining halls, more conscripts in identical gray jumpsuits. No one spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic marching of our escort and our own uneven footsteps. We passed countless identical corridors, turbolifts, and security checkpoints. Stormtroopers stood guard at regular intervals. Officers in gray and black uniforms barely glanced at us as they went about their duties. We were cargo being moved through the vast machine of the Empire. Eventually, we reached another hangar bay, smaller than the first but still large enough to contain several transport ships. These were not the sleek shuttles that had collected us from Kinyara. They were bulky, utilitarian craft designed for a single purpose, moving troops, board by assigned number sequence, a stormtrooper commanded. We filed onto the nearest transport, finding seats in the stark interior. No viewports this time, no way to see where we were being taken. The restraints activated automatically when we sat, pinning us in place for the journey. The engines rumbled to life, vibrating through the metal floor. We sat in tense silence as the transport detached from the Star Destroyer and accelerated away. Minutes stretched into hours. Some dozed despite the uncomfortable seats and constant vibration. I remained awake, trying to track our course by the subtle shifts in momentum, a futile exercise. When the transport finally landed with a heavy thud, the restraints released. The loading ramp lowered, revealing a night sky filled with unfamiliar stars. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and metal. "Exit and form ranks," ordered a voice from outside. We stumbled down the ramp onto solid ground for the first time in days. I looked up at the stars, trying to orient myself, to find some constellation I recognized from Kinyara. Nothing was familiar. We could be anywhere in the Empire. Floodlights suddenly blazed to life, blinding after the dimness of the transport. As my eyes adjusted, I saw we stood on a vast permacrete landing field. Beyond the landing area rose the angular shapes of Imperial buildings, barracks, training facilities, all surrounded by high walls topped with sensor arrays and weapons emplacements. Not just a base, a prison. "Welcome to Imperial Training Facility 47, announced an officer standing before us. Unlike the ship officers, his uniform was adorned with numerous colored squares indicating rank and accomplishment. This is where you will be transformed from civilians into assets of the Empire. He paced before our uneven formation, boots clicking on the permacrete. Forget your previous lives. Forget your families. Forget your names. You exist now only to serve the Emperor. Those who excel will find opportunity. Those who fail will find punishment. Those who resist will find death. The words washed over me like ice water. I looked at the faces around me, seeing the same realization in their eyes. This was real. This was happening. We were being erased. You will now be divided into training units, the officer continued. When you hear your designation, step forward and follow your assigned sergeant. He began reading numbers from a datapad, names of planets followed by 4 digits, KR2187, my designation. I was assigned to Unit Dawn with 20 others, a mix of men and women from Kinyara and worlds I had never heard of. Our sergeant was a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and a face marked by old scars. Unlike the pristine officers on the Star Destroyer, he had the weathered look of someone who had seen combat. His name was never given. He was simply Sergeant. Unit Dawn, with me, he barked. We followed him across the landing field toward one of the identical barracks buildings. As we walked, I caught glimpses of other units being formed, other conscripts being led away. Some looked as disoriented as I felt, others marched with their heads down, already accepting their fate. The barracks was a long, low building with a single entrance. Inside, rows of bunks filled the space. No privacy, no personal space. At the foot of each bunk was a trunk containing a training uniform, basic hygiene items, and a datapad. Uniform inspection in 5 minutes, Sergeant announced. Anyone not properly dressed will run perimeter laps until collapse. We scrambled to find bunks and change into the provided uniforms. Black pants, black boots, grey shirts with the Imperial cog emblazoned on the sleeve. Everything was slightly too large or too small. Nothing fit quite right. A constant reminder that we were not individuals but interchangeable parts in the Imperial war machine. As I pulled on the stiff uniform, I caught the eye of the conscript at the neighboring bunk, a woman perhaps a few years older than me, with dark hair cropped close to her scalp. Her eyes held a stubborn defiance that I envied. "Mira," she whispered. "From Gerard V." I hesitated, then responded, "Ral, Kinyara." She nodded slightly, the exchange of names a small act of rebellion. Then Sergeant returned, and we snapped to attention beside our bunks, already learning the expected responses. "First lesson," Sergeant said, walking slowly down the row of bunks. "You are nothing, less than nothing. The Empire has invested resources in bringing you here. You will repay that investment through absolute obedience, or you will be discarded and replaced." He stopped before a young man who had failed to properly fasten his uniform. Without warning, Sergeant struck him across the face, sending him sprawling onto the floor. "Second lesson. Failure has consequences." The young man climbed shakily to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip. No one moved to help him. No one dared. Training begins at 0500. Anyone not ready will regret being born. With that, Sergeant left, the door sliding shut behind him. The lights dimmed automatically. Around me, conscripts settled onto their bunks, some quietly weeping, others stone-faced. I lay down on the thin mattress, staring up at the bunk above me. "It gets worse," came a whisper from across the narrow aisle. A gaunt man with hollow eyes looked at me. "Been through 3 cycles of new arrivals. It always gets worse." I turned away, facing the wall. I thought of my family, trying to picture their faces, my father's weathered hands, my mother's smile, my sister asking for a star. Already the images were growing indistinct, as if my past was being systematically erased with each passing hour. This was just the beginning. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow the real transformation would begin. The shock of cold water hit like a physical blow. I gasped, eyes snapping open to find Sergeant standing over my bunk, an empty bucket in his hands. Around me, other conscripts were being similarly awakened, sputtering and disoriented. 0500, Sergeant announced. Training begins now. We stumbled from our bunks, shivering in the pre-dawn cold. Outside, the sky was still dark, the training facility illuminated only by harsh floodlights that cast everything in stark shadow. We formed ragged lines as instructed, standing at attention while Sergeant inspected us with contempt. "Pathetic," he pronounced. "The Empire expects uniformity, perfection. You will run until you understand this." And so we ran. Around the perimeter of the training yard, through mud and gravel, past other units performing similar exercises. Those who faltered were struck by training batons carried by assistant instructors. Those who fell were forced to crawl. No one was permitted to stop. My lungs burned. My legs trembled. The farm work on Kinyara had built endurance, but nothing had prepared me for this deliberate, systematic breaking of body and spirit. Beside me, Mira from Gerard V ran with grim determination, eyes fixed straight ahead. Others were not so resilient. The gaunt man who had warned me the night before collapsed after the 10th lap, vomiting bile onto the gravel. He was dragged away. We never saw him again. When Sergeant finally allowed us to stop, the sun had risen over the training facility, revealing its true scale for the first time. The complex stretched for kilometers in all directions, a small city dedicated to creating soldiers for the Empire. In the distance, I could see firing ranges, obstacle courses, and what appeared to be a mock urban combat zone, all designed to transform civilians into weapons. "Formation," Sergeant barked, and we assembled in front of him, gasping for breath, sweat soaking through our uniforms despite the morning chill. "The weak have been identified," he said, nodding toward the empty spaces in our ranks where those who could not continue had been removed. "The Empire has no use for weakness. Remember that." We were marched to a mess hall where protein rations and hydration tablets were distributed. The food was barely more palatable than the nutritional paste on the Star Destroyer, but I forced it down knowing I would need the energy. After the brief meal came weapons training. We were each issued a standard E11 blaster rifle, the weapon of the Imperial Stormtrooper Corps. They were older models, scarred and worn from years of training use, but still lethal. "These weapons are now part of you," the weapons instructor informed us. "You will clean them, maintain them, sleep with them. If you lose your weapon, you will wish you had lost your arm instead." We spent hours learning to disassemble, clean, and reassemble the blasters. By midday, my fingers were raw and bleeding from the sharp edges of the weapon components. Still, I worked methodically, determined not to give Sergeant another reason to single me out. As I worked, I became aware of someone watching me. I glanced up to see an officer in a crisp gray uniform observing our training from a raised platform. Unlike Sergeant, with his scars and weathered appearance, this man was pristine, his face smooth and expressionless. His rank insignia marked him as a major, but it was the red shoulder patch that drew my attention. Imperial Security Bureau. Beside me, Mira had also noticed the observer. "ISB," she muttered under her breath, looking for trouble. I kept my head down, focusing on my weapon. I had heard stories about the ISB, the Emperor's internal security force. They hunted rebels, yes, but they also watched the Watchers, ensuring loyalty throughout the ranks of the Empire. Even Sergeant straightened his posture in the presence of the ISB officer. The day continued with marksmanship training. We were lined up at the firing range, targets set at various distances. The targets were humanoid in shape. I tried not to think about what that implied for our future assignments. "Fire," the instructor ordered. The blaster kicked against my shoulder, the shot going wide of the target. Around me, others were having similar difficulties. These weapons were not like the simple slug throwers some farmers on Kinyara used for hunting. They were military weapons, powerful and difficult to control. "Again," the instructor commanded. We fired until our arms ached, and our ears rang with the sound of blaster discharge. Gradually, my accuracy improved. By the end of the session, I was hitting the target consistently, if not precisely where I aimed. Mira was better, her shots grouping tightly in the center mass of the target silhouette. Her face revealed nothing, but I wondered if she had used weapons before. The ISB officer remained throughout the training, making notes on a datapad. Occasionally he would confer with Sergeant or the other instructors, his voice too low to overhear. But his eyes were constantly moving, watching, evaluating. Evening brought close-quarters combat training. We were paired off and instructed in basic grappling techniques. My partner was a nervous young man from a world called Behemoth. He was thin and quick, but hesitant to strike with full force. The instructor noticed. "Harder," he ordered, striking the young man across the back with a training baton. "The enemy will not hesitate, neither can you." The young man nodded, tears in his eyes, then launched himself at me with desperate intensity. I defended as best I could, but took a hard blow to the ribs that left me gasping. The instructor nodded with approval and moved on. By the time we were finally marched back to the barracks, every muscle in my body screamed with pain. Bruises covered my arms and torso, blisters had formed and burst on my feet inside the ill-fitting boots. I was not alone in my suffering. Everyone in Unit Dawn bore similar marks of the day's training. As we entered the barracks, I noticed 3 empty bunks, 3 conscripts who had not survived the first day of training. Not dead, perhaps, but removed, reassigned to labor battalions or disposal units. In the Empire, failure had swift consequences. 3 minutes for hygiene, Sergeant announced. Then lights out. We rushed to the communal refreshers, a row of sonic showers with no privacy screens. The sonics removed the sweat and grime, but did nothing for the pain or exhaustion. Some conscripts were so tired they simply stood under the sonic emitters, swaying on their feet, barely conscious. Back in the barracks, I collapsed onto my bunk. My datapad blinked with an alert. Training schedule for tomorrow: more running, more weapons drills, combat simulations, and something new: loyalty programming. Beside me, Mira checked her own datapad, her expression darkening. "Indoctrination starts tomorrow," she whispered. I nodded, too exhausted to respond. Already I could feel myself changing, priorities shifting from resistance to survival. Was this how it happened? Not through force alone, but through exhaustion and isolation, breaking down the self until nothing remained but the capacity to follow orders. As the lights dimmed, I tried once more to picture my family. My father's face, my mother's voice, my sister's laugh. The images came, but distantly, as if from another life. A life that was rapidly fading into memory. I heard Sergeant's voice outside the barracks, speaking to someone. The ISB officer, I realized. I strained to hear their conversation. "Unit Dawn shows promise," Sergeant was saying. "Several candidates for advanced training." "And the dissidents?" the ISB officer asked. "Identified, being monitored." "Good. The Emperor requires loyalty above all else." The voices faded as they moved away. I lay in the darkness, wondering who among us had been marked as dissident. Mira, with her stubborn defiance? The young man from Behemoth too hesitant to fight? Myself? Sleep came quickly despite my fears, my body too depleted to resist. My dreams were fragmented images of white armor, blaster fire, and endless running. Somewhere in the distance, my sister called my name, but I could not answer. When I awoke the next morning, my designation came more readily to mind than my name: KR-2187. Imperial conscript. The transformation had begun. The indoctrination chamber resembled a classroom more than the brutal training grounds of the previous day. Rows of uncomfortable metal chairs faced a large hollow screen. The room was dim, the only illumination coming from the blue glow of Imperial insignias projected onto the walls. Unit Dawn filed in silently, taking seats as directed by a stern woman in a black ISB uniform. Her rank insignia identified her as a lieutenant, But she did not introduce herself. She did not need to. In the Empire, rank was identity. Minds, like bodies, must be disciplined. She began once we were seated. Today you will begin to understand the truth of the Empire and your place within it. The holoscreen flickered to life, displaying the Imperial cog symbol. Music swelled, the martial anthem that preceded all official broadcasts. Then images began to flow across the screen. The Emperor addressing cheering crowds. Star destroyers in majestic formation against the backdrop of space. Stormtroopers providing aid to grateful civilians on worlds I did not recognize. Before the Empire, the galaxy was chaos. The narrator intoned, corruption in the Republic, manipulation by the Jedi, war that engulfed 1,000 worlds. Emperor Palpatine brought order from this chaos, security, prosperity. The images shifted to scenes of violence, burning buildings, civilian casualties, destroyed Imperial facilities. But there are those who would return us to chaos. Terrorists who call themselves rebels, criminals who masquerade as freedom fighters. They destroy what the Empire builds. They kill those the Empire protects. More images. Rebel fighters attacking an Imperial convoy. The aftermath of a bombing at an Imperial facility, bodies covered with sheets. A star destroyer burning in orbit, thousands of Imperial personnel lost to the vacuum of space. These are your enemies, the narrator continued. These are the Empire's enemies. Every loyal citizen has a duty to resist the forces of chaos and disorder. The propaganda was crude but effective, especially on minds already weakened by physical exhaustion and isolation. I glanced around the room, seeing the impact on my fellow conscripts. Some watched with vacant expressions, absorbing the message without resistance. Others showed subtle signs of doubt, small frowns, averted eyes, tensions in the jaw. Mira sat rigidly in her chair, eyes focused on the screen but not registering the images. Her face was a mask, revealing nothing. A survival technique, I realized. She was present but not participating, meeting the letter of compliance while protecting something within. I tried to adopt the same approach, to create distance between myself and the images flooding the screen. But the barrage continued for hours. Testimonials from citizens grateful for Imperial protection, confessions of captured rebels describing atrocities allegedly committed by the Alliance, historical records carefully edited to emphasize the failures of the Republic and the necessity of the Empire. Midway through the session, the ISB lieutenant paused the presentation. "You will now complete a loyalty assessment," she announced, distributing datapads. "Answer truthfully. Deception will be detected and punished." The questions were designed to trap as much as to assess. Have you ever witnessed anti-imperial sentiment without reporting it? Would you report a fellow soldier who expressed doubt about an order? Is it ever justified to question the commands of a superior officer? I answered carefully, trying to project the image of a loyal conscript while avoiding statements that would contradict my previous responses. A dangerous game. The Empire's algorithms were sophisticated, designed to identify inconsistencies that might indicate disloyalty. When we had finished, the datapads were collected and the propaganda resumed. But now there was a new element. Between the images of Imperial might and rebel terrorism were subliminal flashes, words appearing and disappearing too, quickly for conscious recognition. Obedience, loyalty, sacrifice, duty, the Empire, the Emperor. By the time the session ended, my head throbbed with pain, eyes burning from hours of staring at the screen. We filed out as silently as we had entered, returning to the training yard where Sergeant waited. "Now you begin to understand," he said, noting our subdued demeanor. "The physical training shapes your bodies, the loyalty programming shapes your minds. Both are necessary to create true soldiers of the Empire." The afternoon brought more physical training, but with a new dimension. As we ran, instructors shouted questions from our loyalty assessments. Those who hesitated or gave different answers than they had written were pulled from the line for special correction. They rejoined us later, moving stiffly, eyes downcast. unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. That evening in the barracks, no one spoke. The combination of physical exhaustion and psychological manipulation had achieved its purpose. Isolation within the group, suspicion, fear of betrayal, the foundations of imperial control. I lay on my bunk, staring at the ceiling, trying to sort propaganda from reality. The Empire had shown us only what it wanted us to see. The noble protectors, the savage rebels. But even in my exhausted state, questions remained. If the Empire brought such prosperity, why were worlds like Kinyara left to struggle in poverty? If imperial rule was so benevolent, why did they need to conscript unwilling citizens to fight their wars? A soft sound interrupted my thoughts, crying, muffled by a pillow. The young man from Behemoth, curled on his bunk, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. No one moved to comfort him, no one dared. I closed my eyes, trying to recapture memories of home. My father's voice, my mother's touch, my sister's smile. But the images were fragmented, disrupted by the day's indoctrination. In their place came imperial slogans: duty, order, loyalty. This was how it worked. Not just breaking the body, but colonizing the mind, replacing identity with imperial purpose. I could feel it happening, could feel myself becoming KR-2187 rather than Ralvek. The process was insidious, working in small increments, day by day, until the transformation would be complete. That night, I dreamed of white armor closing around me, piece by piece, sealing me inside. I tried to scream but had no voice. I tried to run but had no will. I awoke gasping, heart racing, wondering if it had been a dream or a premonition. Days blended into weeks. The pattern remained the same: physical training to exhaust the body, indoctrination to reshape the mind, assessments to identify the disloyal. Each day, the demands increased. Each day, more conscripts disappeared, unable to meet imperial standards. Unit Dawn, originally 21 strong, had been reduced to 14. The missing were never discussed. Their names were never spoken. Their bunks were reassigned to new arrivals, other conscripts from other worlds, all following the same path toward transformation. My body changed, growing stronger, adapting to the rigorous training regime. Blisters hardened into calluses, bruises faded and were replaced by muscle. I learned to field strip an E11 blaster in under 20 seconds. I could hit moving targets at range. I could run for hours, carrying full gear without faltering. My mind changed too, though I fought against it. The constant propaganda created doubts where once there had been certainties. Perhaps the rebels were terrorists, as the Empire claimed. Perhaps the peace of imperial rule was preferable to the chaos of resistance. These thoughts came unbidden, products of the loyalty programming worming its way into my consciousness. Mira noticed the changes in me. "Stay with us, farm boy," she whispered one night as we cleaned our weapons. "Remember who you are." But who was I? Ralvek, moisture farmer from Kinyara? That life seemed increasingly distant, like a story I had heard rather than lived. Now I was KR-2187, Imperial conscript, moving steadily toward becoming a stormtrooper. The white armor no longer seemed like a prison in my dreams. Increasingly, it felt like inevitability. The 8th week brought the first combat simulation. Unit Dawn was equipped with training blasters, weapons modified to deliver a painful but non-lethal shock rather than deadly energy. We were deployed to the mock urban combat zone I had seen on my first day, a maze of prefabricated buildings designed to resemble an outer rim settlement. "Your objective," Sergeant informed us, "is to secure the command center and eliminate all hostile forces." He did not specify who these hostile forces would be. We found out soon enough. They came at us from doorways and windows, figures in mismatched armor and civilian clothes, wielding their own training weapons. Other conscripts, I realized, playing the role of rebels. The scenario was designed to reinforce our indoctrination. Imperials against insurgents, order against chaos. I moved through the artificial streets as I had been trained, securing corners, checking sight lines, advancing methodically with my assigned fire team. Mira was beside me, her movements precise, her expression focused. The young man from Behemoth, who had grown quiet and withdrawn over the weeks, followed close behind, his training blaster clutched tightly against his chest. The first engagement came suddenly. Training bolts sizzled through the air, striking the wall beside my head. Without conscious thought, I dropped to one knee, brought my weapon up, and returned fire. A figure fell in a doorway ahead, writhing from the shock of my training bolt. "Advance," I heard myself say, using the standard Imperial tactical call. My team responded instantly, moving forward in the practiced formation we had drilled hundreds of times. We secured the fallen rebel, as we had been taught, confirming the neutralization before moving on. It was only afterward that I realized how automatically I had responded. No hesitation, no questions. The training had taken hold at a level deeper than conscious thought. I was becoming what they wanted me to become. The simulation continued for hours, our unit pushing through the mock settlement, engaging in firefights, executing tactical maneuvers with increasing precision. We took casualties. 3 of our number were killed by rebel fire, removed from the exercise to observe from the sidelines, but we advanced, relentless, until we reached the objective. The command center was a fortified building at the center of the settlement. Inside, the rebel leadership awaited. As we prepared for the final assault, I found myself next to Mira in a covered position. "This is wrong," she whispered, so quietly I barely heard her over the simulated sounds of battle. I looked at her, surprised by the sudden break in protocol. Her eyes were clear and hard, untouched by the haze of indoctrination that I could feel clouding my own thoughts. "Focus on the mission," I responded automatically. She held my gaze for a moment longer, something like disappointment flickering across her face. Then the signal came, and we launched the final assault. The rebels inside the command center fought fiercely. Training bolts filled the air, the painful shocks causing genuine cries of pain from those hit. I moved through the chaos methodically, my training asserting itself despite the confusion. Target, aim, fire, advance. The procedures were ingrained now, requiring no conscious decision. When it was over, we stood amid fallen rebels, our objective secured. Sergeant entered the building, surveying our work with cold approval. "Acceptable," he pronounced, the closest thing to praise we had received in our training. "The Empire may make soldiers of you yet." As we marched back to the barracks, I caught Mira watching me, her expression unreadable. I looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Something had changed. During the exercise, I had changed. The automatic responses, the unquestioning execution of orders. These were not simulations anymore. They were becoming my reality. That night, the ISB officer visited our barracks. He moved through the rows of bunks, datapad in hand, occasionally stopping to speak quietly with a conscript. When he reached my bunk, he paused, studying me with clinical detachment. "KR2187, he said, consulting his datapad. "You performed well in today's exercise. Your tactical decisions were efficient and effective." "Thank you, sir," I responded, the proper response coming automatically. "The Empire rewards excellence," he continued. "Your unit will begin specialized training tomorrow. Prepare accordingly." He moved on, stopping next at Mira's bunk. Their exchange was too quiet for me to hear, but I saw her face harden, saw the slight straightening of her spine that signaled defiance. The ISB officer made a notation on his datapad before continuing his rounds. Later, when the lights had dimmed and the barracks had fallen into uneasy sleep, I heard Mira's whisper from the adjacent bunk. "They are accelerating the program," she said. "We are being prepared for deployment." I turned to face her, our conversation shielded by darkness. "How do you know?" "I worked in an Imperial processing center on Gerard V before I was conscripted," she revealed. "I know the signs. The combat simulation today was an assessment. We passed." I absorbed this information, uncertain how to feel. Deployment meant leaving the training facility. It meant real combat against real enemies. It meant killing, not just simulations. "Where will they send us?" I asked. "Wherever the rebellion is strongest," she answered. "Wherever the Empire needs to make an example." Her words hung in the darkness between us, heavy with implication. The propaganda had shown us what happened to worlds that harbored rebels: orbital bombardment, mass arrests, public executions. And soon, I would be part of those operations, a faceless enforcer of Imperial will. "I cannot do it," I whispered, the admission feeling like treason even in the relative privacy of the darkened barracks. Mira was silent for a long moment. Then, "There are others who feel the same. Not many, but some. The indoctrination does not work on everyone." I thought of the young man from Behemoth, his quiet withdrawal, his reluctance to fully engage in training. Was that resistance or simply fear? And what of myself? Was my hesitation genuine moral objection, or merely the remnants of my former life that the Empire had not yet erased? "What can we do?" I asked, the question itself an act of rebellion. "For now, nothing," Mira replied. "We train, we wait, we watch for opportunities, and we remember who we were before the Empire took us." Who I was before: Ralvek, moisture farmer, son, brother. A person with a history and identity beyond a designation and function. I tried to hold on to that self, to keep it separate from the soldier the Empire was creating. But the boundaries were blurring. "Get some sleep," Mira advised. "Tomorrow will be worse than today." She was right. The specialized training began before dawn, with a new instructor joining Sergeant. A man in black armor with no insignia or markings, his face concealed by a helmet different from the standard stormtrooper design. He never gave his name. The conscripts called him the Shadow. "You have been selected for advanced tactical training," the Shadow announced, his voice distorted by his helmet speaker. "The methods I will teach you are reserved for elite units. Not all of you will complete this training. Not all of you will survive it." The training changed, becoming more brutal, more realistic. Live fire exercises replaced training weapons. The risks were real now. The consequences of failure potentially fatal. We learned infiltration techniques, hostage extraction, urban warfare tactics beyond the basic training we had received. And still the indoctrination continued, more sophisticated now, tailored to our advanced status. We were shown classified footage of rebel attacks, the aftermath of bombings and assassinations. We were told we were the Empire's answer to these terrorists, the shield that would protect loyal citizens. More conscripts disappeared. Some failed to meet the Shadow's exacting standards. Others were injured during the increasingly dangerous exercises. A few simply vanished overnight, their bunks empty in the morning, their designations never mentioned again. Unit Dawn, once 21 strong, now numbered 8. Mira remained, her performance in training unmatched despite her private resistance. The young man from Behemoth was gone, removed after freezing during a live fire exercise. I survived, adapting to each new demand, walking the narrow line between compliance and complete surrender to Imperial programming. 12 weeks after my conscription from Kinyara, we received our armor. Not training gear, but actual stormtrooper armor, fresh from Imperial factories. The white plates gleamed under the lights of the equipment room as technicians fitted each piece to our bodies. Helmet, chest plate, back plate, shoulder pauldrons, arm guards, gloves, leg armor, boots. Each component sealed me further away from the world, from myself. The final piece was the helmet, lowered over my head with a soft hiss as the internal systems activated. My vision changed, filtered now through the helmet's optical sensors. My breathing sounded loud inside the enclosed space. My voice, when I spoke, was transformed by the helmet's vocoder into the flat, anonymous tone of a stormtrooper. No inflection, no accent, no identity. Through my helmet's optics, I saw the others similarly transformed, no longer conscripts with faces and histories. Now we were identical soldiers, indistinguishable from one another except for the small unit designations painted on our shoulder plates. You are now TK-2187, Sergeant informed me, using the new designation for stormtroopers rather than conscripts. Remember this moment. This is your rebirth as a true servant of the Empire. I looked down at my white-armored hands, so different from the calloused farmer's hands I had once possessed. This was the culmination of the transformation that had begun the day the Imperial shuttle landed on Kinyara. The erasure was nearly complete. That night, sealed in our armor except for our helmets, we received our deployment orders. Unit Dawn would join the garrison on Mantuine, an agricultural world in the Mid-Rim where rebel activity had recently increased. Our mission was to locate and eliminate the rebel cell, pacify the population, and ensure continued resource production for the Empire. We would depart at dawn. Our training was complete. We were stormtroopers now. In the darkness of the barracks, Mira made her way to my bunk. Even without her helmet, she looked different, harder, more angular. The months of training had stripped away softness, leaving only efficiency and purpose. "Tomorrow we deploy," she said quietly, sitting on the edge of my bunk. "Tomorrow we must decide who we truly are." I sat up, conscious of the cameras that monitored the barracks, though the audio sensors were less reliable. "We are stormtroopers," I replied, the expected response if anyone was listening. "Some of us are more," she countered. "The rebellion has contacts in our destination system. There may be a way out." The word rebellion, spoken aloud rather than as a propaganda term, sent a shock through me. This was not veiled resistance anymore. This was explicit treason. The penalty was death. "That is dangerous talk," I warned, my voice low. "More dangerous than becoming the thing we were taken to fight against," Mira challenged. "More dangerous than losing ourselves completely?" I had no answer. The Empire had worked methodically to erase my past, to replace individual identity with collective purpose. And it had nearly succeeded, but not completely. Some small part of me still remembered the moisture farm on Kinyara, still remembered my name, still questioned, "How many others?" I finally asked. "3," she answered. "Maybe 4, not all have decided. Half our remaining unit, a significant risk. If even one reported this conversation to Sergeant or the ISB, we would all face immediate execution. And if we fail?" Mira's expression was grim. "Then we die as ourselves, not as Imperial numbers." She returned to her bunk, leaving me with a decision that seemed impossible. Comply and survive as TK-2187, or resist and likely die as Ralvek. The Empire had designed the entire conscription process to eliminate such choices, to make compliance the only conceivable option. But they had not quite succeeded with all of us. Dawn came too quickly. We assembled on the landing field, identical in our white armor, helmets sealed, weapons charged with lethal settings. A Lambda-class shuttle waited, ramp extended. The same type of craft that had taken me from Kinyara, though not the same vessel. This one was newer, its white hull unmarked by dust or combat. Sergeant stood before us, conducting a final inspection. The Shadow observed from a distance, his black armor a stark contrast to our white plates. Behind him, the ISB officer made notes on his ever-present datapad. "Unit Dawn has met Imperial standards," Sergeant announced. "You will deploy to Mantuine and execute your assigned mission. The Empire expects success. Failure is not an option." We responded in unison, our voices rendered identical by our helmet vocoders. "For the Empire." One by one, we boarded the shuttle, taking our positions in the troop compartment. Through my helmet, I could not tell which trooper was Mira, which were the others who might be planning resistance. We were anonymous now, even to each other. The shuttle lifted off, leaving the training facility behind. Through a small viewport, I watched the complex recede, the place where Ralvek had been systematically dismantled and TK-2187 had been constructed from the remains. I felt nothing as it disappeared from view. The Empire had trained emotional responses out of us as thoroughly as they had trained combat tactics into us. The journey to Mantuine took 3 days. We spent the time reviewing mission parameters, studying maps of the target area, and maintaining our equipment. Conversation was minimal and functional. Even those planning resistance knew better than to speak openly on an Imperial shuttle. On the final approach to Mantuine, the shuttle pilot's voice came through our helmet comms. "Prepare for combat deployment. Intelligence reports rebel activity in the landing zone." So it would begin immediately, no gradual introduction to our new posting. We would transition directly from training to combat. The Empire wasted nothing, especially not freshly trained stormtroopers. The shuttle shuddered as it entered Mantuine's atmosphere. Through the viewport, I caught glimpses of a world not unlike Kinyara. Agricultural fields stretching to the horizon, scattered settlements, a people who likely wanted nothing more than to tend their crops and live their lives without Imperial interference. And we were coming to ensure their compliance, to hunt those among them who dared to resist. This was what I had become. This was what the Empire had made me. "Final weapons check," ordered the trooper designated as our squad leader. Not Sergeant, who had remained at the training facility, but one of our own who had shown particular aptitude for leadership, TK 1854, formerly a conscript from Corellia. I checked my E11 blaster rifle, confirming power levels and settings. The weapon was an extension of myself now, as familiar as my own limbs. I had fired it thousands of times in training. Now I would fire it at living targets. 30 seconds to landing, the pilot announced. The shuttle banked sharply, then descended rapidly, a standard evasive approach to minimize exposure to potential ground fire. The maneuver pressed me against my restraints, the pressure a reminder of the reality of what was about to happen. The craft touched down with a jolt, the boarding ramp lowering before we had fully settled. Light flooded the compartment, along with the sounds of battle. Blaster fire. Shouted orders. The distinctive whine of Imperial speeder bikes. "Deploy," ordered TK 1854. We moved as we had been trained, exiting the shuttle in tactical formation, seeking cover, establishing fields of fire. The landing zone was a burning agricultural processing facility. Imperial troops were already engaged with local fighters, armed with a mix of blaster rifles and farming implements converted to weapons. Through my helmet's targeting systems, I identified the enemy positions. Rebels. That was what the Empire called them. But as I raised my weapon, I saw something else. Farmers. Workers. People like my family on Kinyara, fighting against a power that had arrived uninvited to control their lives and resources. "Engage," came the order. Around me, my unit opened fire. White armored troopers advancing methodically, driving the rebels back with precise volleys. I moved with them, my body responding to training and orders, while my mind remained strangely detached, observing from a distance. A rebel fighter appeared in my sights, a young woman with a harvester blade modified into a crude weapon. My finger tightened on the trigger. The Empire had trained me for this moment. Thousands of repetitions, muscle memory, instinct overriding thought. But I did not fire. In that critical moment, something broke through the programming. A memory. My sister asking for a star. My mother telling me to remember who I was. My father pressing the moisture regulator tool into my hand, a small act of rebellion against Imperial confiscation. I lowered my weapon slightly, aiming at the ground near the rebel rather than at her body. My shot kicked up dirt and debris, causing her to retreat without injuring her. A small deception, but a significant one. My first conscious choice since conscription. The battle continued around me. I moved with my unit, maintaining the appearance of participation while carefully ensuring my shots did not find human targets. It was a dangerous game. Imperial helmet recordings would be reviewed. Failure to engage the enemy was treason. As we pushed deeper into the settlement, the fighting intensified. The rebels, though poorly equipped, knew the terrain and fought with the desperation of those defending their homes. Our superior training and equipment gave us the advantage, but the cost was visible in the bodies that lined our advance. I lost track of the other troopers from Unit Dawn in the chaos, unable to distinguish Mira or the others who might share my reluctance. We were all identical now, white armor moving through smoke and blaster fire, faceless and interchangeable. Then, amid the confusion, a private channel activated in my helmet comm. A voice I recognized despite the vocoder distortion. Mira, Maintenance Sector 7, when you can break away. No acknowledgement was possible without triggering monitoring systems. I continued with the advance, watching for an opportunity. It came when our squad split to secure different areas of the settlement. My fire team was directed toward a storage facility while the main force continued toward the center of the rebel resistance. Checking the perimeter, I announced to my team leader, a standard procedure that would not raise suspicion. Confirmed. Maintain comm contact. I moved along the exterior of the storage facility, using the building for cover as I worked my way toward Maintenance Sector 7. The designation likely referred to a utility area, something not immediately valuable from a tactical perspective and therefore unlikely to be heavily monitored. I found it at the edge of the settlement, a small building housing atmosphere, processors and water purification equipment, essential infrastructure, but not a combat objective. I approached cautiously, weapon ready, maintaining the appearance of a trooper conducting a standard sweep. Inside, 3 stormtroopers waited. Without helmet designations visible, I could not immediately identify them, but one stepped forward, helmet tilted in recognition. TK-187. Mira's voice came through a private comm channel. You made a choice. I did not fire on civilians, I confirmed, still uncertain of what was happening. Was this truly resistance or an elaborate loyalty test? The Empire was known for such tactics. None of us did, said another trooper. But that is only the beginning. We must do more. What more can we do? I asked. We are stormtroopers now. The Empire controls our every movement, monitors our every action. Not completely, Mira replied. She reached up and removed her helmet, revealing her face for the first time since we had received our armor. The others followed suit, and after a moment of hesitation, so did I. The sensation of unfiltered air on my face was startling after hours in the sealed helmet environment. More startling was the reminder that we were still individuals beneath the uniform armor, still humans with faces and identities. The rebels are retreating to the Eastern Highlands, Mira explained. Imperial forces will pursue. In the confusion, a small group could slip away. Desertion, I said, the word itself seeming to carry the weight of Imperial punishment. Freedom, countered Mira. The chance to choose our own path. The Empire will hunt us, warned one of the others, a man I recognized from Unit Dawn despite the changes wrought by our training. Desertion is punishable by death. We are already dead, Mira replied. The people we were died in that training facility. What remains is just Imperial programming in human form. I would rather die fighting for freedom than live as a weapon aimed at the innocent. Her words resonated with something deep inside me, something the indoctrination had not quite reached. I thought of my family on Kinyara. What would they think of what I had become? What would I think of myself in the years to come if I continued on this path? How do we do this? I asked. Mira smiled, the expression strange on her face after months of enforced emotional control. We have made contact with the local rebel cell. They are expecting us. We remove our armor, acquire civilian clothes, and move east, separately, to avoid detection. We rendezvous at coordinates they have provided. It sounded simple, but I knew it would be anything but. Imperial forces would establish a perimeter, patrols would search for rebels, surveillance systems would monitor movement, and once our desertion was discovered, we would become priority targets. Yet the alternative was to continue as we were, to become fully what the Empire had designed us to be, weapons, tools, extensions of Imperial will with no identity or choice of our own. I am with you, I decided. The others nodded, their decision made as well. We were only 4 out of the thousands of stormtroopers the Empire created through conscription, but in that moment, our small resistance felt significant. We removed our armor piece by piece, revealing the black bodysuits worn underneath. Without the white plates, we looked smaller, more vulnerable, but also more human. Mira had arranged for civilian clothes to be hidden in the maintenance building, simple farming garments that would allow us to blend with the local population. "We move separately," she instructed as we changed. "Maintain calm silence. If any are captured, we cannot compromise the others." I nodded, understanding the implication. If caught, we would face Imperial interrogation, torture, drugs, mental probes. Better to die than to endure that and betray the others. "May the Force be with you," said one of the troopers, using a phrase I had heard only in whispers, a remnant of a belief the Empire had sought to eradicate. "Remember your names," Mira added. "Not your designations, your names." Names. I closed my eyes, searching for the identity that had been systematically stripped away. "Ral Vec," I said finally. "My name is Ral Vec." We separated, each taking different routes toward the eastern highlands. I moved carefully through the settlement, avoiding Imperial patrols and staying within crowds of civilians when possible. Without armor, I was just another farm worker caught in the conflict, not worth a second glance from the stormtroopers focused on pursuing the retreating rebels. As I reached the edge of the settlement, alarm sirens began to wail. Our absence had been noted. The hunt would begin soon. I quickened my pace, heading into the agricultural fields that would provide some cover on the journey to the highlands. Behind me, Mantuine settlement burned, Imperial forces bringing overwhelming firepower to bear on a civilian population whose only crime had been to resist exploitation. This was the reality of the Empire, stripped of propaganda and justification. This was what I had nearly become part of. I thought of the others from Unit Dawn who had not joined us. Would they recognize the truth of what they were participating in? Or had the indoctrination taken too deep a hold, replacing conscience with conditioned response? And what of the millions of stormtroopers throughout the galaxy, their ranks constantly replenished by conscription from worlds like Kinyara? How many were like me, trapped inside white armor, their true selves buried beneath Imperial programming? How many might still be reached, still be awakened to the possibility of choice? I could not save them all, but I could save myself. I could choose to be Ral Vec rather than TK-2187. I could choose to fight for freedom rather than enforce oppression. It was a small rebellion in the face of the Empire's vast power, but it was a beginning. As I moved through the fields toward the distant highlands, I remembered my sister's request. "Bring me a star," she had said on the day I was taken. I had thought it an impossible promise then, a child's wish that could never be fulfilled. But now I understood what she had really been asking for. Hope, a light in darkness. A reason to believe that something existed beyond the shadow of the Empire. And perhaps, in my small act of rebellion, I had found that star, not just for her, but for myself. The path ahead would be dangerous. The Empire would never stop hunting deserters. The rebellion might not fully trust former stormtroopers. The programming I had received might never completely fade. But for the first time since the Imperial shuttle had landed on Kinyara, I moved with purpose rather than obedience, with hope rather than resignation. I was Ral Vec, not KR-2187, not TK-2187, a person, not a designation. The Empire had taken many things from me, but they had failed to take that. And in that failure lay the seed of their ultimate defeat. For an empire that ruled through fear and control could never fully extinguish the human capacity for choice. As night fell on Mantuine, I looked up at the stars, bright in the darkening sky. Somewhere among them was Kinyara, somewhere among them was home. I did not know if I would ever see it again, but I knew that I would live and die as myself, not as the weapon the Empire had tried to make me. And that, in the end, was a victory they could never take away.